Hello, my name is Nadia Escarce. I'm going to talk about individual difference in second language learning, based on the book How Language Are Learned. This means that we will look at individual variation in second language acquisition and why some people learn a second language better than others. Unlike young learners who acquire a language easier, while old learners who learn a second language rarely reach the same level proficiency as native speakers. The first individual difference is the intelligence. When we speak about intelligence, we refer in this case to performance on certain type of tests, which are sometimes associated with success in school, forming a link between intelligence and second language. As most of you may know, IQ tests have been demonstrated over the years, which are believed to be able to predict success in learning of a second language. However, this test is more related to metalinguistic knowledge than to communicative ability. There is a theory by Howard Gardner that we have multiple intelligence, which are linguistic intelligence, logical, mathematical, musical, spatial, among others, and that IQ tests only assess some of this intelligence, and that is why those tests can measure only language analysis and rule learning, and not communication and interaction or verbal intelligence that will be associated with success in school. Another one is the language learning aptitude. Aptitude is one of the specific skills and factors that is related to language learning. An author of this hypothesis is John Carroll, who has characterized aptitude in terms of the ability to learn. So it can be deduced that a student with high aptitude can learn more easily and quickly. With this ability, you can recognize grammar rules by listening and understanding what will be wrong in a sentence. For example, the sentence, "Yesterday went I home," knowing that the correct sentence will be, "Yesterday I went home." Having this aptitude helps to understand explicit and implicit learning, although aptitude is more related to explicit learning. This theory is from Peter Schihan. This means that a student with aptitude could take better advantage for the input than other students with low aptitude, associating with successful learning and development of fluency. That is why explicit teaching can help, since without explicit teaching, there is acquisition, while without input, there is not acquisition, no matter how much aptitude the student has. Learning styles. Another individual difference is the learning styles, defined as the way in which a person absorbs, processes, and retains new information and skills. So we can see some example of these learning styles, such as visual, where a person doesn't learn something until he or she has seen it. The auditory is best learned by listening, and the kinesthetic, where physical action such as role play help to increase learning. There are many questions about how learning styles are related to language learning success. But the important thing is never to use this learning style as tool to classify them as needs you. But that is where these pedagogical approaches should be adopted so that the student can learn according to their preference and needs, since our way of learning evolves and changes constantly. There are many personalities characteristics that affect the learning of a second language. For example, an outgoing student can adapt well to learning a language, as also accordingly one Fillmore observes that a silent learner can be more successful in learning. Another aspect of the personality is inhibition, being a negative factor for the performance of pronunciation. Anxiety is probably the factor most hinders the process of learning a second language, although some researchers affirm that a moderate level of anxiety can be beneficial. However, most of the students carry out corroborated the opposite, since anxiety is commonly associated with negative feelings such as frustration, insecurity, fears, or tensions. This factor can influence the participation of students, blocking and paralyzing the learning process. That is why the role of teachers is important and that they have the necessary tools to face this affective variable, trying to control and motivate students through the existence of a favorable school environment in interaction and graded performance. Attitude and motivation are also important factors for this learning. If a student has a positive attitude, it deduces that there is a successful learning. And once if the learning is successful, it generates positive attitude. And it's associated with the will to continue learning. When students are motivated, they learn more quickly and effectively. This action is influenced by the first is the communicative need of the students, which means that if a student needs to speak a second language to meet their goals and professional ambitions, perceive the communicative value of a second language, being more likely to be motivated by the acquisition. Robert Gardner and Wallace Lamble gave terms to the concept of motivation. The first, being instrumental motivation, is learning the language for pragmatic purposes, such as getting a job or degree. And integrative motivation is learning the language for professional growth and cultural enrichment. These two types of motivation, as we can deduce, are related to success in learning a second language. Motivation in the classroom. Motivated students are usually those who actively participate in class, express interest in the topic, and gain great learning. As mentioned above, the role of the teacher must be one that is capable of optimizing the conditions so that the process of teaching or learning of a foreign language is adequate, since by making the classroom place where students enjoy being, the content be relevant, interesting, according to their age and abilities, and that is how motivation will be an action that will occur spontaneously in students. Identity and ethnic group affiliation. Social factors affect the motivation and attitude from the student toward language learning. Inside the classroom, there is a power relationship between the language. An example of this is that members of a minority group may have different attitude than their counterpart. Also, students tend to assign role or being ESL to themselves, such as the quiet one or the successful one, making them stick to a certain pattern of conduct and dictating how much they are going to participate and how their performance will be. There are similar cases when students make mistakes on purpose, so they don't feel like they are pretending to be better than the rest. These identities are very unhealthy in the classroom, since they promote fears in some students, thus conditioning their participation and therefore their learning. Learners' beliefs. Students have different beliefs when it's come to language instructions, and these beliefs are based on previous learning experience and which instructional approach works best for them, as it influences how students learn new materials. Age and second language learning. There is the critical period hypothesis that proposes there is a time in human development when the brain is predisposed to successful language learning. Young learners in informal language learning settings tend to have more opportunities to listen and use the language where they are not pressured to speak fluently from the beginning. Also, imperfect efforts are often praised or accepted, while for older learners, they are more likely to find themselves in complex linguistic situations and with complicated ideas. Also, lack of command of the language makes them feel embarrassed, which affects their motivation to use the second language. However, old learners are more efficient than young learners because they can use metalinguistic memory knowledge, strategies, and problem-solving skills that they could make the most of in using a second language. Conclusion. In conclusion, it's important that language instructors take into account all the individual difference of their students and adapt their lesson to meet the needs and preference of their students to facilitate language learning, to increase their motivation and skill for successful learning.